Whitley Court may be a gaunt and empty ruin of a building, but it still reeks of the sort of extravagance peculiar to the brash aristocracy of the late Victorian era, with apparently endless funds based on land and heavy industry. A nouveau riche. The modern equivalent might be internet billionaires crossed with Russian oligarchs, perhaps. Now, the history of the building is as convoluted as that of the families which have owned it since a medieval manor house was first built on the site. It sits on the southeastern corner of the Black Country, a few miles from Stourport and a bit closer to Worcester, just far enough away to be able to ignore the smoke, dust and furnace fires, to say nothing of the poverty of the families working in the harsh conditions of the Victorian pits, ironworks, steelworks and other heavy industries that provided the Earl of Dudley and previous owners with millionaire lifestyles. Now, the Foley family, who bought the Whitley estate in the second half of the 17th century, were key figures in the Black Country's development as an industrial area, starting out as nail makers after Richard Foley stole designs of a nail making machine from Sweden. Now, his son married the daughter of an armaments manufacturer and inherited half of that business. And all, of course, were eminently respectable, at least by the mores of the time, serving as local MPs and as high sheriffs in Staffordshire and Worcestershire. Like many other members of the British aristocracy, the Ward family, the Earls of Dudley, who bought the estate a century later, had another even darker foundation for their wealth, with 3,000 acres of sugar plantation in Jamaica, which had 270 slaves up until the abolition of slavery back in 1807. In the middle of the 19th century, peak of empire and Britain's industrial dominance of the world, the Earls of Dudley owned 200 mines in the Black Country, bringing in £112 million a year in today's terms, as well as the Starbridge and Dudley Canals, the massive Round Oak steelworks at Brierley Hill, and no fewer than 40 miles of private railway linking many of these assets. Small wonder the Dudleys could afford to launch a massive rebuilding programme to transform Whitley Court into an Italianate palace, cladding the entire exterior in Bath stone and creating new interiors decorated in the style of the palaces of French royalty, who had been removed, of course, from their thrones and executed by the Revolution a few decades earlier. The exteriors today give a clear image of what's been lost, with magnificent John Nash porticos and classical proportions, as well as some remarkable architecture which has echoes of the Royal Crescent at Bath, despite being simply an extension added to the house. Now, the Earls of Dudley may have had their fortunes rooted in grubby industrial trade and even slavery, but they had arrived amongst the landed gentry. Indeed, they owned vast chunks of countryside, more than 25,000 acres, and very productive acres too, as well as their homes in London, Boulogne, Nice, Rome, which ensured their constant presence on the social and political scene. The gardens at Whitley are a triumph even now, and English heritage has done a good job of restoration, especially the Perseus and Andromeda fountain, once the largest in Europe and now restored to working order. It was being prepared for the summer season when we visited and a bit bereft of liquid. Now, the grounds too, with the large front pool created by damming a stream and the woods currently bedecked with daffodils, all creating an idealised rural landscape, Although low water levels in the pool while the dam and sluices are being repaired currently detract from the vista envisaged by their designer. The Prince of Wales, Bertie, became a regular visitor to Whitley, often for massive shooting parties where thousands of pheasants and partridges, all saved up by the gamekeepers, ready for the visiting guns, were slaughtered as the Dudleys competed to match similar shoots in the royal estate at Sandringham. The regular massive parties and formal balls also entertained royalty and the privileged at Whitley, and the Michelangelo Pavilion, once fully glazed with plate glass, must have been a magnificent space when thronged with party guests gazing out across the parterre gardens to the grand fountains. But all good things come to an end, and after Queen Victoria's death at the turn of the century, the family fortunes of the Dudleys began to decline and the bills piled up. The Earl split from his wife and she took Whitley Court, but after she drowned in a swimming accident at yet another family house in Ireland, Whitley Court was sold. The new owner was also attempting to become an upwardly mobile industrialist. He was a carpet maker from Kidderminster known as Piggy, but he seems to have bitten off more than he could chew, and he slashed the number of servants and retreated to just a couple of rooms in the house. And in 1937, while he was away apparently, a fire started in a basement bakery and swept through most of the central and eastern parts of the house, gutting them. It was sold and then sold again, mostly as a ruin, to an antiques dealer who flogged off anything of value before leaving the buildings to go to rack and ruin. But eventually, not until 1964, a building preservation order was slapped on Whitley Court, and a few years later the house and grounds were scheduled as an ancient monument. Since then, the Department of Environment and later English Heritage have been working to preserve the building and grounds and making this monument to Victorian extravagance accessible to ordinary people, including, I hope, the descendants of those miners, ironworkers and even slaves who provided the profits which built it.